Hi, I am Myra Cassidy, empowerment coach, religious trauma specialist, speaker, writer, and actress. And I have the wonderful opportunity today to speak with Miss Michelle F. Moseley. So glad to have this opportunity to talk with you today. Michelle is a licensed clinical mental health counselor who specializes in supporting survivors of spiritual abuse or religious trauma and drawing from her lived experience and professional training when doing so. She provides therapy services via telehealth in North Carolina and also provides continuing education for mental health professionals and training workshops on the topic of being trauma informed for ministry leaders all over the world. So, Michelle, I'm so glad to have the opportunity to talk with you today. I'm very grateful that I myself have had the opportunity to be in one of your teaching spaces, and it was phenomenal. It
Thank you so
changed my
much.
life. And I truly mean that. So I am so glad to have this conversation with you today. Michelle, let's get right into a little bit of information so we can let our viewers know a little bit more about you. So tell us a little bit about yourself. I know I read your bio, but there's more to Michelle than just that. There was a beginning before therapy. So tell us a little bit about yourself and also why you chose the therapeutic specialty of religious trauma.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity today. I'm so glad our paths crossed. Yes, working in therapy, being a mental health counselor, is a second career for me. My first career out of college was actually in vocational ministry. I worked in evangelical Christian spaces. Um, Particularly with college students. I had my own experience of spiritual abuse and religious trauma within those spaces. And so when I exited that career, I knew that I wanted to continue helping people, supporting people, that I wanted to get further training in how to do that in a more boundaried way, and in a way that just provided more professional training and abilities to support people with various things going on. So that is when I went to grad school for counseling. Did not intend to work in the niche or work with survivors of religious trauma. At that time, my own experience was still a little too close. I was very early on my own healing journey. And actually, I think I had been in practice about 4 or 5 years. I had someone who came in with totally different concerns, and as we were working together, some stuff came up from their religious experiences and how that was impacting them. And I realized I feel like I can support this person. And this person was like, "You speak this language. I don't have to explain all of the inner workings of how this particular group worked." This person ended up referring some other folks to me, and it just kind of became the niche that found me. That's how I refer to it sometimes. Because like I said, it was not my intent to specialize in this area. But I've also found that there are many folks who have experienced spiritual abuse, have experienced harm in religious spaces, and are looking for support from someone that has the clinical skills and training, but also understands how important and central that religious or spiritual piece can be to your life, and how hard it can be to have a shift in those beliefs.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So when we get into talking about spiritual abuse and religious trauma, let's give a clear definition for it because in some spaces there's a difference in the definition.
Mhm.
So go ahead and please share with us a clear definition by defining religious trauma and religious trauma syndrome. And then also, how does this present in a person's life?
Yeah. So the definition that I frequently use for religious trauma is that it is the physical, emotional, or psychological response to religious beliefs, practices, or structures that overwhelm an individual's ability to cope and to return to a sense of safety. So when things are happening related to religious beliefs or practices or the structure of an organization or church itself that are overwhelming to an individual, to their nervous system, to their ability to have emotional safety, that person can experience religious trauma. Now, religious trauma syndrome, that is a specific phrasing that Marlene Wynell came up with, and it describes the simultaneous symptoms or characteristics that a person may experience related to harmful experiences that they had within religion, and also to the secondary impact of leaving that religious group. So that can impact various areas of life from the cognitive or the way a person thinks, to their emotional experience, to their socialization, their relationships, to even some physical impacts that they may have as a result of harm that they experienced both within the group and in the impact of leaving the group.
Now, Michelle, why is it that some people get this horrible condition which causes so many complex issues? We said harm, we've said psychological functions and different things, it's nervous systems being affected here. And why is it that other people seem to be immune? Because that's the big thing. We went to the same church.
Yeah.
Or for me, we went to the same Kingdom Hall. We experienced the same thing. What are you talking about? So could you speak to that?
Yes. So this, we're really understanding more that trauma in general, and when we're thinking specifically about religious trauma, has to do with a person's individual nervous system. So, how a person's nervous system just biologically is wired to respond to events is going to vary. So, for some folks, a certain event is going to be very difficult. It's going to weigh down on their nervous system. They're not going to be able to shake it off. They're going to continue to think about it. It's going to show up in lots of ways in their life. Um, this is also impacted by, do they have lots of people around them that are able to help them feel safe? If you don't, which often with religious trauma, you may be in a situation where everyone around you has the same belief system. So the things that you're experiencing as harmful, all of the people around you also hold those beliefs or participate in those practices or are part of those structures. So you're not able to find safety in a community somewhere. Whereas for another person, their nervous system may not experience those things as traumatic. That may not register with their nervous system at all, or it may be on the level of like, that feels a little off, but they're just able to move on. They may also have lots of connections outside of the church or the group. And so they're able to find safety in relationships in other places. And so that's why some folks can be really impacted by an experience, and other folks, it doesn't register in the same way. They don't have that same experience of trauma.
Okay, so Michelle, with me, my faith background is being that of one of Jehovah's Witnesses. When I'm speaking, I tell people that's just all I've ever known. So I speak from that background. So from that perspective, I wanted to make sure that I dig a little deeper, and not just for people who are Jehovah's Witnesses, whether they be active, inactive, disfellowship, or ex-JWs, but for everyone in the whole sphere of religious trauma. But some of these questions I do want to make it a little bit specific towards that religious group. So let's dive a little deeper into this topic. So when we look at the scope of religious trauma, how isolated do victims tend to feel? Like, how bad does this get? And then what is the deconstruction and reclamation process for them like?
Yeah. I find that it is a very common theme that folks feel isolated. How that shows up may vary depending on the group they came out of. So if someone is coming from a group that disfellowships them or shuns them, that tells everyone to cut off contact with them when they leave, that isolation can be felt more intensely or in a different way than someone who doesn't experience that, who maybe they lose a few relationships when they leave, but they still have connections with some folks, particularly if their family, they're still able to have connections with their family. It can look a little different. But isolation is such a common experience because for so many of the people that I've supported, and this is true of my own story as well,
Mhm.
um, that often they are folks who were very, very committed to their faith.
Yeah.
They weren't people that were on the fringe. Their faith practices were central to their life. And so when there is a shift, when there is deconstruction of those beliefs, even when there's questioning, they can lose a lot of relationships. Um, and so the isolation can feel really, really intense. That one of the other things I do is run a therapy group for folks who have experienced religious harm. And that is a common theme that folks are so thankful that they have the opportunity to connect with other people who get it,
Mhm.
um, and to feel that connection and less isolation,
Mhm.
because that's something that they're all experiencing.
And what are some examples of how faith-based individuals minimize or blame the victim? We spoke about it a little bit earlier. When you're in a situation where everyone has the same belief system, it seems like you're just being gaslit over and over and over again. So could you go ahead and give us some examples of how faith-based individuals minimize or blame the victim?
Mhm. So sometimes if someone starts asking questions about beliefs or certain practices, there can be, sometimes it's very obvious, covert, like we don't ask questions, we just have faith, you just believe. Sometimes it's a little bit more kind of undercover,
Mhm.
but basically delivering the message of questions are not okay. If you truly believed, you wouldn't have questions. Your faith is not strong enough. I find that can also happen if someone is struggling with their mental health, that they get lots of messages of your faith is not strong enough. And really it could be, no, actually, I have, brain chemistry difference going on and I need medication, or I need therapy. I need some skills to be able to deal with what's going on. Um, or I have experienced some other type of trauma and I actually need to have that addressed. Faith isn't the only thing I need. That can be
Mhm.
very important, and that's not the only thing
Yeah.
that I need. I also find that a lot of times folks will, as they're questioning, as they may be deconstructing beliefs, they even go through their own process of like, well, I don't, maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe it's really not that bad.
Mhm.
Maybe I could figure out a way to deal with this. Particularly if they are around a lot of other folks that don't seem to be impacted in the same way. There can be a lot of questioning of like, well, why is this impacting me? Um, how is this my fault? Um, and that's one reason that I think the word religious trauma can be very powerful. In my personal experience, when my therapist used the word trauma and said, Michelle, it sounds like you're having a trauma response, it was very validating. And I was like, oh, there's a reason that I'm experiencing all these things.
Mhm.
And I also recognize for some folks that's not the case. The word trauma does not resonate with them, and we don't have to use that word. We can acknowledge,
Mhm.
okay, this is impacting you, it is affecting you. And if the word trauma doesn't fit for you, we don't have to get hung up on that word.
Mm, mm. Yes, I recalled something just now. I remember being in your space of teaching, and I asked a question because I was curious. So it's been some time since that occurred. So I had wanted to know, could this mean a person can't read their Bible?
Mhm.
And I remember the response being that that is a normal stimulus. So I would like to be a little bit more specific, because drawing from not just my own experiences, but those of other people, if I see the Kingdom Hall, I can have a panic attack
Mhm.
or feel the need to run. I want to
Mhm.
run off this parking lot. And I know it's the same thing for other people. Just passing a church could do that. Could you speak more to, I guess, the stimulus, if I'm saying that right? um, what are some normal things I've heard in some of the Facebook groups that I go to for my own healing journey? People have the song, they tried to listen to a song they loved in
Mhm.
church, just cried. I used to love this song. Why can't I listen to it now? Oh God. Could you speak to that?
Yes, that is so normal. That is a thing that happens for many, many folks. When you have been harmed in a space, you have experienced harm connected with a particular belief system. really anything that is connected with that can bring up those reactions. And sometimes it's not something we think. Like it's our brain doesn't register it, but our body knows. We feel that panic. We drive by the church or the Kingdom Hall and we feel sudden nausea or like my heart's racing. What's that about? And it can really be anything that was connected to the belief system. So prayer, reading scriptures, specific songs, certain people, certain spaces. Some folks will even have particular types of clothing that are related to their belief system. And anytime that they think about that clothing or that they are faced with the opportunity of choosing clothing, they might have a reaction. So really anything that is connected can bring up that bodily reaction because sometimes the things that we may not even remember or we may not think about consciously, our body holds on to. It knows.
Yeah, yeah. Oh my goodness, my goodness. So I wanted to talk more about a little bit with the religion of Jehovah's Witnesses here, because within my own personal following, that's kind of the audience that I speak to. I'm always open to doing whatever I can as an empowerment coach, and referring people to different information, but that's my background. So I wanted to ask a few more specific questions per that pathway or per that faith-based background. So when it comes to the religious entities of, for example, Jehovah's Witnesses, what behaviors cause this religion to be classified as high control, high demand?
Mm.
Because that high control, high demand is a very important word in the religious trauma space.
Yes, yes. Um, so high control or high demand refers to spaces where the leadership, the leader, some entity has a lot of control, a lot of say over every aspect of members' behavior. And so with Jehovah's Witnesses, and please correct me if I misspeak since this is your personal
Absolutely.
experience,
Yeah.
but my understanding is lots of rules around how you're allowed to participate in things, not being allowed to say the Pledge of Allegiance, not celebrating birthdays, not participating in extracurriculars at school, things like that. So a lot of control from the leaders within the organization around what you're allowed to do, even with time that is outside of the organization. Also, my understanding is a lot of demand on how you use your time, that it should be used to share the message, to bring other people into the organization, that you're constantly to be doing things that are in service of the organization and therefore of God.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I would piggyback off some of the things that you mentioned, and I would say when it comes to things like more of the flag salute, that would be more of a standard biblical teaching per the religion of Jehovah's Witnesses. But when you talk to the extracurricular activities, now that is where I see so much impact, and even with my own raising my own children, because for one of my kiddos needing to be in that social setting was going to connect to school.
Mhm.
So we didn't do it. And now I can see that, you know what I mean? So, I think back now and the way I identify myself is I am an active witness and I'm a PMO, physically in, mentally out, which for me, that's a spectrum. So because I speak the way I do and I do this, I get classified or accused of being an apostate, someone who's completely opposed. But my standing is no, I've experienced religious trauma and I have religious trauma syndrome and it's not okay.
Mhm.
And I don't have to accept this. This is
Mhm.
my life. This is the life of my children. And this is not okay. And
Mhm.
we don't have services for this, which is one of the reasons why this is an initiative of mine. We don't have our own therapists. We don't have, some religions do. I went to Indiana Western University to get my degree in psychology. So I say all that to say things like more of, I would say definitely like the after school activities. I would also touch on our letters of introduction. So if we want to move from one kingdom hall to another, the elders write what's called a letter of introduction, and it's delivered to that other kingdom hall, but we don't get to see it. And I've always had a really big issue with that. I don't get to see something that you wrote
Yeah.
about me And in my own personal journey, I was questioned about something in the letter. And I was like, well, why don't you let me see it? And
Mm-hmm.
you can't see it. So why, so there's certain things like that that get very specific,
Yes. Yeah.
with that. Um, and I think that's why there just needs to be more conversations on how to handle this population of Jehovah's Witnesses. Because I've also had different prejudices in spaces where I was seeking help because there not being enough, understanding. So I would definitely say that just to kind of give a look, just to kind of piggyback off what you're saying. But also when it comes to Jehovah's Witnesses, when it comes to the current practice or professional opinions, this is a really important question here. Does it seem like Jehovah's Witnesses are more impacted by religious trauma than people of other religions? Because in some of the spaces that I've been in, people are saying like something's wrong with us. We feel different. Or there's people who have said, well, I was this religion before I became one of Jehovah's Witnesses. I don't feel this way about that religion. I only feel like my brain can't get past um, teachings from that of Jehovah's Witnesses. So people are like, something's wrong with us. Have you, can you speak to that, or have you heard complaints from maybe people who have exited from Jehovah's Witnesses? Are they like, there's something wrong with us? We're having a harder time trying to adjust. And I know this is a long question, but for me, I think specifically, personally, we believe in a paradise earth. So if a person wants to go to another religion, perhaps, and start learning about going to heaven, how that would be a very difficult shift. Or
Mhm.
for me personally, if I was to start celebrating birthdays and I've never had one all my life, the impact of that. So I've heard that buzz in certain spaces and wanted just to see just from what you've kind of
Yeah.
seen, or maybe have heard, does it seem like something's more impactful here with this brand of people and maybe some other brands, what brands, but other high control demand religions? Does it seem to be like certain religions seem to have more
Mm.
damage or complex issues, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Yeah. My brain is firing in a million directions right
Okay,
now with
okay.
that
I was like, that
question.
was a long question.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's a great question. Um, I will say that first off, there is very limited research around religious trauma and spiritual abuse. Um, there is more happening, but as far as being able to say what the research says, there still needs to be a lot of research just across the board. Um, I will say that you are probably in a better position to know kind of what folks are saying within the JW, XJW kind of communities, having that have been part of your experience and like
Right.
you're part of the community. Um, Speaking from, working with folks, talking with folks who are kind of where you are of I am not walked away from my faith, but also it looks a lot different.
Right.
Or folks who are like, no, I'm XJW, like that's not part of my life.
Right.
I can see ways that the impacts echo other high control groups, but also can look very different. If you, as you were saying, if you've never celebrated a birthday in your life, and then you want to celebrate a birthday or you are even thinking about the option, like that can feel very unsettling of like,
Right.
is this something I'm allowed to do?
Right.
Whereas there's a lot of groups where celebrating your birthday wouldn't have even been a thing. There might have been rules around how you celebrated it or like,
Right.
how big the celebration was. But of course I'm going to celebrate my birthday, you
Right.
know? And so that can be like a thing that's very normalized in society, but was not allowed within um, for folks who were JW. Um, I think also the things like the extracurriculars, you know, for maybe kids who wanted to be involved with school sports teams.
Yeah, I have a sibling that he's an
Yeah,
ex-JW, but he wanted to play basketball. That's a big
yeah,
part of his
yes.
thing. Yeah. Yeah.
and like that might be so much a part of like, this is an interest of mine. This is something I want to pursue. For some folks, it may even be to the level of this is going to help me get into college or be a career, but I'm not allowed to do this at all. And then you're living with that regret of like, but there's this very normal thing that is part of lots of folks' school time that they play sports, and I wasn't allowed to do that.
Yeah.
Um, I also, another thing that has come up, oh, probably over the past year, with a few ex-JWs I've talked with is around voting. Um,
Mm.
and
Mhm.
coming up to an election and maybe really, really wanting to vote, but also having that internal battle of like, am I allowed to do this? Like,
Mhm.
there's so much messaging that this was not okay. How
Mhm.
do I even feel about this? Like, and really having that struggle and also feeling like you can't voice the struggle anywhere because there's going to be a lot of folks who don't understand and are going to be like, yes, your voice needs to be heard. Go vote. And they don't understand the battle that you're having because you've been told for so long that that's not a thing you need to participate in.
Oh, that was a good one. Thank you for sharing that. That was a good one. So, what are some common pathways, not just for Jehovah's Witnesses, but for people who are experiencing religious trauma that they choose? For example, some people exit purity culture, some people are PMO, some people actually step back and go back.
Mhm.
So, what are some of these pathways?
Yeah, really, every person's pathway can look different, just like every person has a different nervous system, different experiences. Um, and so part of my work is that I really focus on supporting folks where they are. And for some folks, that means I don't want anything to do with anything religious or spiritual. I'm not interested in any of it. For other folks, that is, I'm not interested in this belief system or this group or this church, but I do want some kind of spiritual practice. And so part of their process is figuring out what does that look like? What does spirituality look like for me? Are there ways of being spiritual that maybe I've never considered because the group I was a part of said those were evil, but I actually might want to consider what that might look like. Um, and that also can change for the same person. There may be periods where they're like, I don't want anything to do with this. And then periods where they are like, I want to explore. For a lot of folks, there is what I kind of refer to as a push-pull of I leave the group, but I kind of go back to the group. I leave the group, I kind of go, can I find a way to be part of this, to still hold these beliefs, to still be involved in these practices that is not harmful. And some folks are able to find that. Some folks are not. They try multiple times and then they're like, no, this is not going to work for me.
Ooh, it's tough. And I
Hmm.
can speak on that on my own journey. It's tough. And certain days something comes up and I gotta deal with it and things like that. I mean, just speaking of my own personal journey, I just made the decision just to have what works for me is definitely limited contact with the Kingdom Hall. And that's how I live my life. Like I don't physically go.
Hmm.
Uh my God knows I didn't do it. But that I mean, that is just per me. I've definitely seen so much in this world,
Yes.
for sure, for sure.
And
So
that
back
I'll
to
just can I just interject for a
yeah,
moment?
please, please.
That's also where that idea of like trauma informed or trauma aware ministry comes in. Because if you have folks who are in leadership positions, and that may be the pastor or the clergy, but it can also be folks that are leading in other ways,
So true.
who are aware of, okay, I mean, if you have a big group of people, you have folks in there who have experienced some type of trauma. You
Yeah,
have folks who are experiencing mental health concerns.
yeah.
We know that is true. So being aware and being able to create spaces and knowing like, okay, there may be certain things that really like bring a reaction to somebody and they need a space to step back. Like some people, there may be songs that they can't sing, or there may be certain topics that are talked about that just hit them the wrong way. I hesitate to use the word trigger because I feel like that is used so often now. but it literally can be a trigger for past trauma. And they need the option to know it's okay if I don't sing, or it's okay if I get up and I need to walk out and there's this space that I can go to. And nobody's going to think poorly of me. I'm not going to be in trouble. Like that's part of creating a trauma aware space for ministry to happen.
And you have to have the specific training. So
Hmm.
I will say for like Jehovah's Witnesses, in my mind, it would be someone saying, okay, we are trauma informed pioneers, or or trauma informed ministers, or a trauma informed publisher, to use that terminology. Um, because in my own, experience, like that, like you said, that is so important. When I did not know what was wrong with me, I found myself I would go to the Kingdom Hall, and then someone who from the past was speaking, I had to get up and leave and go home.
Hmm.
And how wonderful it would have been if someone understood that, or even when I tried to explain it to leadership, and they said, "Well, come listen in the bathroom. You were going to the Kingdom Hall, now you're saying you can't go to the Kingdom Hall. Can't you go
Hmm.
and listen in the bathroom?" And I'm not ashamed to tell anybody, I was actually suppressing myself. I was literally getting to the Kingdom Hall, letting my kids go inside and indulging of something to suppress that, a
Hmm.
beverage to
Yeah.
suppress it, if you can see where I'm going here, because
Hmm.
I just simply did not know what to do. And that's terrible, because
Hmm.
also with many trauma survivors, they turn alcoholism, especially from what I'm understanding, especially for females coming from being a survivor of domestic violence, easy go to.
Hmm.
Easy go to. Very slippery slope, very slippery slope. Um, so thank you for speaking to that, because it's important. Like, you got to support this person. This person needs to have support
Hmm.
to heal and be to a healthy state of mind. So thank you so much for that. So Michelle, another wonderful thing about you is that you have programs that you offer to both professionals and faith-based leaders. Could you please just tell us more about those programs, and how can someone sign up?
Sure. So for other mental health professionals, we're all required to get continuing education hours so that we continue learning. So I offer courses that are approved by NBCC, which is the National Board of Certified Counselors. So it covers counselors all over the U.S. That are approved for continuing education credits on topics related to religious trauma. Everything from a religious trauma one-on-one 101 type of training, so an introductory training, to trainings that are more in depth, to things that are very specific, so neurodivergence and religious trauma, group therapy and religious trauma. So any mental health professionals that are interested in registering for those, there is information about that on my website, which is just myname.com. So michellefmoseley.com. There is a continuing education tab where mental health professionals can learn about those courses. I have quite a few coming up throughout the rest of 2025, and I offer them all virtually. So they are available to anyone, anywhere who has access to internet. Um, and then my trainings, seminars that I offer for faith-based leaders are really based on understanding trauma in general, as well as religious trauma, understanding mental health, and understanding the intersection of faith and mental health, being aware of resources that are available, how to notice when the folks that they're working with or they are serving in their ministry context may need something more, may need to talk with a therapist or some more professional type of mental health support than what they as a faith leader are able to provide, and also how to have a trauma informed or a trauma sensitive ministry or religious faith-based space. And the information about that is on my website as well.
Want to touch a little bit on healing modalities in general. Um, that's really important, also when we talk about therapy and things like that. So, could you touch on a few of the healing modality techniques that could be used to help survivors of religious trauma or victims of religious trauma? And tell us a little bit about narrative therapy here as well.
Yes. So I draw from a lot of different modalities working with clients, really depending on what they might need. So that might include um, working on coping skills. Being able to find a sense of safety if you have been in experiences where you just weren't able to feel emotionally safe at all. That may include figuring out, okay, well, how do I have relationships with people who are outside of this group, particularly for folks who come from a very insular or insulated type of background. Um, that may include things like body-based therapies, where we're figuring out what are you actually feeling in your body and how do we make that connection from brain and body. So that could be things like EMDR or brain spotting. I know we don't have time to get into the details of all of those right now, but those are just some options. And then you asked specifically about narrative therapy, which is another modality I use. And narrative therapy is focused on allowing a person to tell their story, to recognize the story that they have been told, who has controlled the narrative, who has told you who you are or who you're supposed to be or what is allowed, and how do you want to reshape that narrative? How do you want to show up? And I find that can be really helpful for folks who are experiencing religious trauma, because a lot of times they have gotten a lot of messages about who they are, how they're supposed to interact with the world, how they're allowed to show up, and to be able to recognize, oh, these are messages that I was given, maybe from their religious belief system, maybe from their family, maybe from um, how they were socialized or grew up in the world. And there's parts of this I might want to hold on to, and there's also parts of this I want to shift because this is not actually who I am.
Right, right. And thank you so much for that. I wanted to touch on that because in my own journey, I've learned the difference between, or learning the difference between narrative therapy, drama therapy, and then even more deeper than that, psychodrama. So thank you for the clarification for that. Is there anything else you'd like to share on this topic before we conclude today?
I feel like we've touched on a lot of different areas. I mean, this is definitely a topic that I could talk about for hours because there's so many intricacies and pieces to. Um, but I'm happy to answer any questions folks have. They've got my website information. If folks are interested in any of the continuing ed or the training for faith leaders, I'm able to offer the training for faith leaders virtually as well. So it doesn't have to be location limited. And I'm able to tweak things for your particular group or organization, talk with you about what your needs are. So happy to do that, to be able to meet more specific needs that folks who are listening might have.
Yeah, thank you so much for the work that you do. Thank you so, so much. So, as we go out today, one final time, if you would just please give your website for us, I appreciate it.
Yes. Yes. So it is michelefmosley.com.
All right, thank you so much, Michelle. And to all you viewers out there, thank you so much for taking your time to listen to this very, very important topic. So, like I always say in many of my other videos, make sure you take good care of yourself. Heal yourself, heal your children, and make sure you do this the correct way. Thanks so much for watching.